Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Supervision Simplified. I am one of your hosts, Dr. Amy Parks.
I am Valarie Harris.
Rick. Hi, I'm Valarie Harris. You can say it more perky than that.
I'm Valarie Harris.
So we're so excited to have you here at the Supervision Simplified vidcast, and we're going to be talking today about effective supervision in the mental health field, which is what we talk about all the time. But today we're also going to be talking about a little bit about some stories, or sharing some stories and wisdom from the trenches that we've heard sort of on the main streets about people's experiences in supervision. So I know that both of us have experienced our own unique challenges in supervision. People come to me as the owner of the clinical supervision directory all the time and tell me their stories about how crazy their supervision was, or some people had really bad supervision or lost all their hours in supervision. And that happens kind of a lot. I was lucky enough to have a good supervision experience, but I didn't find my supervisor from my work. I had to go hunt them down. And so like my process of finding a supervisor was really challenging, which made it, I think it had a couple layers to it. So finding a supervisor was hard. It was kind of like a drug deal where you had to like ask a friend of a friend of a friend, and then like did a secret interview with them. And then like I was so nervous and so afraid to just reach. I don't know why. I was just like, I can't call them. I can't, you need to introduce me. And they're like, okay. And so now I think that's funny thinking back on it, but I didn't have any idea. And so because it was such a like feeling like clandestine kind of thing, and then this person was such a like aspiration for me and such an aspirational person to work with, it took me a while to really feel like I could actually talk to them and really share anything. I felt like I was really performative a lot of the beginning of my supervision. So I hear that a lot. I also hear a lot of people who go, so that was like me searching for a supervisor and finding someone. And then I hear of people who have the supervisor that where they work, where they're sort of stuck with them. Although it's a great benefit in a lot of businesses, in many businesses, all businesses, I think, that provide supervision, I think it's great. Good for you. Well done. I'm really thrilled about that. And yet, if you are forcing two people together that might not mesh, or don't have the same value alignment, or don't have the same philosophies, or don't even, a lot of times the supervisor just doesn't have time for the supervisee, or their issues or whatever that's going to come up, then it can be a really bad mismatch. And that's where I hear the majority of stories I hear are because of a bad supervisor-supervisee mismatch.
Yes, I would agree with that. I also think that probably as a supervisor, I've experienced some of that, where there's a connection with some that are better, and then a connection with some that it's not that they're necessarily bad, but they don't organically come off the ground in the same way that some of the others did.
Right.
And so even for the supervisor, it can be challenging because you're not sure, like you're not sure if it's you or if it's just not a right match. But then again, but we also have, so I'm in a unique place, kind of like you, whereas I own the practice, but I'm also a clinical supervisor. And so because I have that dual role, we have another approved supervisor through the state that's offsite, but does face-to-face virtually. And that's kind of to try to mitigate some of that, but also to create checks and balances for me, so that there is someone else who is on the same level with me as far as reportability and that they can go to. And I always encourage my supervisees to ask me why I am doing what I'm doing at any given time. You can ask the why. Just because some of the things that I've heard, I feel like a lot of what I've heard, honestly, has been more from people who came in as clients that were therapists and had terrible supervision in their sites, or people drinking on the job and they have alcohol up there, like just weird things where I'm like, that is egregious.
Right.
So
usually it's much more subtle than that, but sometimes big things like that happen.
Or I'm just not getting any at all. And I mean, like, I'm like, you mean there's none ever? No.
Right.
It gets
Yeah.
she cancels mine every time.
I want to go back. I love your I want to just kind of point out the action step that you threw out there so casually, and that was encouraging your supervisees to ask you why you're doing things. I think that that is a really, really valuable strategy for everyone to start applying. And for supervisees that are watching or listening, they can go to their supervisor and say, "Hey, could I start asking you why you do things?" Because it's funny because when we're teaching behavioral sort of development for kids and families, we talk about don't worry so much about the why, just deal with the what and how right now, because the why is very um, nuanced, and your kids are little and they're or your young adults are developing and blah, blah, blah. But as you become an adult and as you move into the workforce, it's really important to understand why you do things. And sometimes, I don't know about you, but sometimes I probably do things that look weird. I can't
Absolutely.
think of exactly an example, but I'm sure I can think of examples at home where my husband is like, why do you do that?" I'm like, "Thank you for asking. Let me tell you exactly why I do not put the sponge on the back of the sink."
Right.
Because mold grows there and I don't want that to happen. So it has to go in the sink. Oh, of course he still puts it on the back of the sink. So it's a moot point.
Yes.
But the point, the issue is like explaining your why is a great way of understanding process.
Yes, absolutely. And that's one of our core values is intentionality. For that reason is knowing why you do what you do. But I tell them you don't have to know all the things, but you have to know what you don't know and you have to know where to go.
Yeah,
So
and it's hard. That whole idea of you don't know what you don't know is really, really challenging, really challenging. I'm seeing that more and more.
mhm. Yes.
And yeah, it's really, really
And I think
interesting.
it raises imposter syndrome a lot
Mm,
because then when confronted with a misstep, whether it's through a video session or through feedback from a client, and then, having that discussion about what was missed and how it was missed, it's trying to mitigate the process and pace it in such a way that it can still be constructive and it can create value and add value and come from a place of curiosity. But even not knowing what you don't know can create feelings. Like, have a perfect example of this. It is a supervisory thing in a sense. So I've had a lot of people that have come from community mental health, and they have worked for several years. They have invested their time. They have grown as best they could there. They have developed there, but there were certain things that they did not get there. And so coming into our practice, one of the things that has become hard about that is there are people that are in internship and in other levels who are doing some of these things or can see some of these things easier because they've had this support for longer. And so even as they come into awareness of the things that they still need to grow on, it's almost like there's a grief that comes with that because they've worked just as hard and
mhm,
put in more
mhm,
time
mhm.
than maybe their peers up to this point, and yet there's an imbalance maybe in some of those more nuanced things because they were not adequately supported.
Yeah, and that happens in a lot of settings. I mean, it happens in a lot of private practices too. I mean, every setting has different offers different experiences for
Yeah.
the supervisee. So some are going to be incredibly high quality, and some of them are going to be challenging. And I think one of the things I want to talk about in terms of stories from the trenches are things like being able to be exposed if you are a person that speaks Spanish, for example. You're not a first language English language individual, so there are very few supervisors in the U.S.
Wow.
That are fluent in Spanish and offer supervision in Spanish. So, or in a foreign language. So that is really an interesting fact. And looking for people that offer that level of diversity is really important. Diversity in and of itself
Yes.
is a huge, huge thing. And we talk a lot about how if this idea of you're being sort of forced into the funnel of supervision through your business, and there's no one in that's supervising that's a clinician of color that you can identify with culturally, that can really change the
Yes.
dynamic completely of your supervision. And that's, I think, again, where a lot of horror stories come from is, like I was harmed in this experience because this person didn't value or recognize my culture, or wasn't culturally sensitive, or, really didn't create a space of safety for me to feel like I could, kind of come into this and be, have a perspective that is maybe not the same as their own. And so that's really interesting. But I mean, like, if we want to talk about the crazy ones, like, like there's lots of, not lots, but there are quite a number of stories where I've heard where, a supervisor has asked their supervisee to go to a meal and then hit on them. And so, like, that sometimes happens.
Oh my gosh.
And the reverse happens too, like where the supervisee is sort of like in love-ish with the supervisor. And so then they kind of hit on them. I mean, that happens in lots of
I
different
know.
places,
I
right?
like to think it doesn't.
So yeah, so that does happen. That happens. That's like a supervision horror story. And then like really serious ones, like people being misgendered over and over and over and over and over again by their supervisor, or they've given their chosen name, they've been using the wrong name or the wrong pronouns over and over and over and over. That happens actually more than you would want to
Oh my
think.
gosh.
And so, yeah, it happens way more than you think.
We start a registry for those people to be reported.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. I mean, there isn't a lot. That's a really good point. There isn't a ton of oversight for these kinds of things.
I know, but this is a lot of
like
harm.
a supervision recovery support group. But, one of the reasons why we started the clinical supervision directory is to create these environments where you could find someone that you could align with. And so, like, you can ask for pronouns, and if you speak another language. I had somebody approach me at a conference as the owner of the clinical supervision directory, and they were deaf, and they were an
Wow.
emerging clinician. Now, they had some hearing, limited amount of hearing, but they really needed an accommodation in supervision. I had a student also who was blind. Oh, here's a really interesting story. So I had a student that was blind, and in supervision, so this is really interesting. So they were in internship, and they were not in supervision yet, but they were being supervised as an intern. And they were because they were blind, the way the strategy was developed for them to participate in internship was that they would have a supervisor with them in session. And that supervisor with them in session would, I guess the premise was, they would be available to sort of see the client, and if there was any physical reaction that maybe the clinician didn't pick up on, or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't really exactly know, but I guess that was the premise for it, right? And so one time, this particular student was in session and did not know, and despite being blind and having incredible hearing, right, and like supersonic abilities in every other sense,
correct,
except for
right.
hearing, right? Didn't know that the client they were supporting started to cry, and didn't make this like client, I guess their voice didn't modulate, nothing happened, just like tears started dripping out of their eyes, right? So of course, the supervisor that's sitting right there sees the client with tears falling out of their eyeballs and doesn't say a thing, didn't make a comment at all. So the student, the intern in supervision, is just sitting there, just like doing their work and not knowing that the client is crying.
It's a perfect example of misattunement.
Okay, so then the client quit therapy and complained that they were not supported by the clinician because they didn't notice they were crying. Okay, so here's two things that came out of that. Number one, that was a big major problem because the supervisor should have absolutely stepped in and done something very gently to sort of guide that experience. Mm-hmm. But also, I found out afterwards, in talking with this student I was not supervising them, but I was aware of their circumstance, that the student had felt extraordinary discomfort around talking about their disability with their clients, and coming at their client like relationship with it, like everything out on the table, because it's very complicated to learn, what do you share, what do you not share, how much is
absolutely
too much. And so, like, I was like, well, the fact that you're blind is kind of a major thing to share,
right?
know, like it
It's
doesn't
a
have to
need
be
to
super
know.
serious, but you can say like you might notice this and this and this, and that means this and this.
Hmm.
And so, I mean, I guess not a horror story, but really damaging to, well, kill the supervision relationship, dead. Obviously, the client was gone, so lost the client work and the
Yeah.
client support. It had didn't have support anymore, and then really eroded the confidence in support and in skill level of this particular intern. So lots of things went wrong there, and then of course, the supervisor just kind of, unfortunately, didn't handle it. I don't think in the way they could have, but that's neither here nor there at this point because I don't want to go any further with that story. But I do think that there are a lot of ways that things went wrong.
Yes, I could see. And even as you're saying that, so we actually have a clinician in our community who I'm pretty sure is an LCSW, is blind
Hmm.
and does play therapy.
Hmm.
Go
That's
figure.
amazing.
And it is incredible. So now I'm like, yet again, you present me with something where I'm like, I have an idea. And I'm like, she could totally do supervision and maybe she'd be open to it. That would be a fantastic resource to
Well,
have.
yeah, I mean, having somebody that is literally has doesn't have a one sense, especially working with kids, being because you have to be so highly sensitive when you're working with kids
Yep.
to all the things. I think that would be really
And
fascinating.
we've referred to
So
her many times and gotten phenomenal. Like they're like, I don't know how she does what she does.
that's
It's
great.
it's like a superpower. So
That's fantastic.
that would be fantastic supervision for a student like that
Yeah.
needed
So
that.
one of the things you brought up was what happened to that supervisor or what happens to supervisors. Is
Yeah,
there like some kind of
a
supervisory like
registry for that.
complaint board or something? I mean, there's certainly the board of counseling and there's each state has their own board of counseling. So there's certainly those avenues when you feel like someone has sort of egregiously violated what you consider to be appropriate supervision boundaries or ethical, but supervisors are held to the same ethical standards. But
Hmm.
process is very individual and so process and execution are extremely individualized. There's no, just like
Hmm.
therapy, there's no one's going to report you for using CBT over DBT with a client. It's just not going to happen. And the same thing with supervision. No one's going to report you being necessarily using different modalities. But to to your point, should someone say when something egregious happens with their supervisor? Yes.
Yeah.
Do they? Oftentimes, no, because you
No.
know why? They don't want to lose an hour.
Oh, yeah, that. But I also feel like they don't know the ethical requirements
Oh
of their
gosh, if
supervisor.
only that were the only reason. But they don't want to lose
That
the
too.
hours.
There's the power
Oh
differential.
yeah, I worked with another supervisee several years ago who had kind of a falling out with their supervisor, and they had done so in Virginia we have to do 200 hours of supervision, and they had done about 75 with this supervisor, and then they got a job and left that employment. Now, it wasn't a bad leaving or anything like that, but they left that employment. Well, as a result, I guess, of leaving that employment, they had a falling out with this supervisor who was also their boss. And the supervisor
Do not.
refused to
Oh,
sign the
no.
paperwork. Refused. Now, the board did get
I
involved.
was going to say, why
I
is
sort
that
of
not?
gently got
That
involved.
should
Yeah,
be
I mean,
unethical. Just like you don't hold people's records for payment. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
I have actually thought about though not holding records for payment, but and not. I have thought about that. Another thing that's true when you go to other states. So, say for example, you're in Tennessee, and this is not true like for Kentucky because Kentucky you have reciprocity. But say you want to go to Colorado, or like a perfect example is say you want to go to like New Hampshire or New York or New Jersey or DC. DC is the best example because it's crazy town there. So, if your clinician that you supervise want to go to DC, you have to, as a supervisor, have to sign off on their paperwork.
oh, I had to sign off for one that went to
Right.
Colorado
Now,
for
after a
military.
certain period of time, you're pretty much grandfathered in. But in the early years, if you're moving around, you have to sign off. Okay, so imagine if you, number one, your supervisor's lost, moved, died, or can't stand you anymore, or you've pissed them off. Like I have thought about, if a supervisee pissed me off enough, like I could just refuse to sign their paperwork. There's nothing that says there's no ethical guideline that says I have to sign
Which
paperwork.
that's a problem.
Nothing that says that.
I think
Which
it's
it's actually so seriously. I thought to myself, you know what? If that person came to me, I might say no. I'm not doing it. It's a lot of work. I'm just telling you, it's a lot of work. Like transferring someone's license to DC is a hell of a lot of work.
Oh yeah, no, I don't
It's
know how
bad.
bad it is there. I did have one for the military. Went to Colorado and sent me paperwork, and it was very alarming at first because I was like, I don't know anything about Colorado law, and so then I had to read the forms and read them again. And I knew she had done the hours, but she needed to verify how much she had done to get a temp license there.
Well, and then you have an obligation to like figure out how things are working in the other state.
Yeah,
But
because
there,
I
no, there's
wanted to make
nothing that
sure I
says
wasn't signing
right,
something that was
right,
not in line with what they do.
or
So
what she had done with you.
right,
Right?
yep,
Right. So yeah, it's
it
really
was
interesting.
difficult.
There isn't and like nobody pays you for that. They just expect you to sign it. And I'm like,
Exactly.
girl or guy, like really, I'm not doing that. Like I don't have time. So I've had people that reached out to me and they said, oh, can you submit this by tomorrow? Like, no.
Right.
I can submit it in 3 weeks. Like
Hmm.
let me put you on my to-do list
Exactly.
where I can fit it.
I was like, it's going to take some time. Like,
Seriously.
I,
So that I mean, that's kind of a
but she was grateful and she was like, take your time. Yeah.
that's
But
nice.
I was not expecting it to be a Colorado form, which was weird. I almost thought like I would sign them in Tennessee or the
Oh
Tennessee form and
no.
you take that to Colorado.
Oh
But
no, no.
clearly that we are not that
And
sophisticated.
some states are still requiring you to fax them. I'm like, faxing? I like don't even know how to fax
I
anymore. Like
mean, no,
faxing is so old
we have a
fashioned.
fax, but I've
No,
never used it.
I don't have a fax. I have no, I mean, I'd have to go to like FedEx to fax something and I don't fax
How do
anything.
you fax test results?
I don't fax any
And
test
records,
results.
you know?
No, we just securely sign them and email them.
Oh,
We password protect them and email them. I'm not, but I don't fax anything. So I just scan it and send it. But you can't scan everything because they need a wet signature on a lot of these things,
oh,
which means you can't have a photocopy of it. So anyway,
yeah.
so lots of really complicated details around supervision, and I know that there are many more horror stories. So
Oh, I wonder if so. You know, we said that we were going to create an email
mhm.
for this. I wonder if we should create a separate one that for people, or it could be this one, but where they could just send their stories in.
Well, they can DM us
Or
absolutely.
yeah,
Yes, we're
but
going to
you
definitely
need to
be.
clarify if you want your if like whatever you don't want shared, you just be clear. We won't
We're
share
not going
the
to put
same.
any, I don't think we're going to put anyone's name. I would love to know the state if we could, because
Yeah.
the state would be pretty
Well,
key.
some may want to come on and actually talk about it. So I
Sure.
want to give them that opportunity. But if
Sure.
they don't, I want them to like say, you could share the story, don't share my name, or you could
Yep.
share the state, don't share my name, or
Yep.
whatever.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that that would be really key and really fun, but and interesting and informative. So you can certainly DM those to us, and we'll be getting some more links in our show notes and in other places. That's your job. I don't have any of that skill. So I mean I do, but you're gonna figure that out. And so when we figure all that stuff out, we'll be able to connect with more people and be able to get those kind of inside stories and things like that. I think, the biggest thing is, we hear stories all the time of, ethical violations. And mostly the stories that I hear are around just basic confusion around regulations.
Yep,
And some of that comes from the regulations being ridiculously confusing.
absolutely.
And some of them come from people just not reading them.
Correct.
And so that makes
Before you
that
make an
makes me
accusation
mad.
about one, you
Right,
should have it in writing.
right.
You should know the code, you should have the link, and you should provide that to the person that you're going to confront with that.
Oh my God.
Otherwise, you're
Yeah.
going to end up being thought of
But it's
a
interesting. A lot of
certain
people
way
ask
by
me,
everyone that you're going around confronting people
a
about.
lot of people ask questions before they even do the research too. And part of that is understandable because it's so complicated to try to find any regulations about anything in most of these state board websites. So I get how complicated it can be. But definitely make sure that you know your regulations and you're aware of them, because sometimes, many times, I hear stories also of supervisors have no idea what the regulations are in their state.
Yeah,
No, no
or
clue.
even interns from school to school. So some interns may need a supervisor or a licensed person in the building. A lot of other universities will not require that. But if you're a student and that's required, you need to know that up front and you
Yeah.
should communicate that to your supervisor and not just put that on your supervisor.
And this isn't about throwing supervisors under the
No,
bus. This isn't about throwing businesses under the bus, any of those things.
it's about how quickly all the wires get crossed and get
Yes.
messy,
Yes.
all from a lack of clarity in whose role it is to do what.
Yes.
And also just not considering the position of the other person and what they're dealing with, and immediately filtering things through a lens of it feeling some like personalized in some way.
Yeah. So, again, we're not trying to badmouth anyone, but we are trying to elevate the profession of supervision provision. And so it's important for us to be talking about the things that we could all do better.
Mm-hmm.
And so this tales and wisdom from the trenches, as part of today's episode, is just the start of what we'll be talking about in our series of vidcasts for you, in Supervision Simplified. So our note here says it's called Supervision Chronicles, but I don't think that that's exactly. I think, what did you say you were going to call it? I can't believe they did that, or they
Yeah,
did what?
they did what? They
So
did
exactly,
what?
exactly. But we hope the stories and insights inspire and resonate with people that are listening, and that you can remember also that, of course, supervision isn't just about guiding others, but also about continuous growth, and then our own self-reflection as supervisors and supervision seekers.
And
So
protecting the field that
yeah,
we work in
yeah,
by
yeah.
not exploiting it and getting messy.
That's totally right. That's totally right. Thanks for tuning into this episode of Supervision Simplified. Remember that the revolution starts here. So we hope you've subscribed to Supervision Simplified, and that you will share it with your friends and your colleagues, and listen to it between clients and when you're in the car on the way to work or
Give us
school.
reviews.
Absolutely. Also, send us your comments and feedback so we can be sure to be talking about what interests you the most.
Yes.
Until next time, keep simplifying and elevating your supervision game. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.